Hi there. In this video I'm going to show you a technique which is designed to retrain neck muscles which can become very deconditioned and weak with modern day human life. So before we get into the technique for that, it's worth just discussing these postural problems, these musculoskeletal dysfunctions which develop and why this exercise is important. Everything in modern human life is pretty much in front of us. Being very dexterous and using whether it's computers or steering wheels or phones, the tendency is to round and slump forwards. And what happens at that point is the visual line comes down. So the body does the easy option instead of doing the more difficult option, which is to retrain our body to sit up and fight gravity. From that rounded position, the chin simply pokes forwards and you end up looking in that parallel line again. That's very problematic when it comes to lots of things in the neck. And the resultant issue is that the upper thoracic spine, the upper torso, and the bottom of the neck end up coming in this fixed position of flexion, which is bending forwards. And the upper part of the neck, the upper cervical spine, then ends up going into a position of excessive extension. And you get this much more noticeable S-bend in the upper back and the neck than what there should be. As a result, the muscles on the back of the neck get very tight and compressive, and the muscles which are deep inside this part of the body, which support cervical spine flexion, become very deconditioned. The length-tension relationships between the front and the back get very confused, and typically these muscles would test very weak as they're fighting a battle they can't really win. So in order to try and begin the process of helping with that, it's important to retrain these deep neck flexors. Now this would be done in conjunction with multiple other strategies to improve mobility and control in the thoracic spine and the deeper abdominal canister, as well as stretching muscles in every aspect of the shoulder girdle. So this is not a foolproof single intervention issue, but retraining and focusing on the deep neck flexors is a very important part of addressing this whole movement disorder characterized by that rounded position and chin poke. So in this technique, I'm going to be using a rolled towel for the most part because that's something everyone's going to have. You can also, and this is a very nice thing to have in your locker, have what's called a pressure biofeedback cuff. Now of course this is a bit of a niche item, but for those of you who need to commit to a fairly long-term program of retraining your neck, or you have significant problems there, this is well worth investing in. They're somewhere, not too expensive, between $30 and $50 or £40, something like that, depending on which side of the pond you're coming from. But they will provide much more of an objective read into the techniques discussed here. I'll go through how we would use that at the end of the video because most people won't have one of those. Anyway, the rolled towel, it'll depend on size, comfort, neck, position, etc., etc. So it might take a little bit of adjustment, but we'll get into how to use this when we go through this exercise. It's going to be performed lying on your back with your knees bent and your feet flat, and this is going to go underneath your neck. Okay, so this is the start position for the exercise. The towel underneath needs to be big enough that you feel it's nestled into that natural curve in the back. If it's too small, you're really going to find that you're struggling, particularly as a lot of people who will need to practice this will be very stiff in their mid-back, and that will be in a kind of fixed curve and will not have the ability to extend or flatten towards the floor. So you need to make sure that your start position is comfortable. The towel needs to be firm enough that it's supportive, but not overly firm that you can't press down into it, which will form a large part of the exercise. I've got my knees bent and my feet flat, and I've got a neutral position in my low back, which is characterized by a fingertip gap underneath the lumbar spine, the base of our spine. We don't want our spine flattened, we certainly don't want it overly arched. One aspect of performing this exercise is going to be keeping the rest of the body relaxed while the neck performs the target movement. So just to demonstrate what that is, the shoulders will be relaxed, the hands will be relaxed to start with, and you simply press slightly down into the towel with the back of your neck. And then you would release. And that's a very subtle movement, and there's lots of things that need to be addressed when performing this. The first thing is that if deep neck flexor training or retraining has been prescribed or suggested, the overwhelming likelihood is that the superficial neck muscles will be overly dominant, will jump in at every opportunity to try and do this movement. So what I would tend to encourage people to do is to have their hands resting, either one hand or both, just resting on these superficial anterior neck muscles, and then feeling what happens if you try and lift your head slightly off the towel. You get this sheet of muscle tightening on either side, and all these powerful muscles are exactly the ones you want to stay switched off when performing this. So if you're new to this exercise, have those hands resting around the front of the neck, and this will give you the feedback as to whether these muscles are doing something which you don't want them to do. The next aspect is the jaw muscles. Again, these are muscles which can become very overdeveloped, hypertonic, dominant, however you want to try and describe that. And we don't want any tension around our jaw. So a really nice workaround for that is to push your tongue onto the roof of your mouth. In that position, you'll notice you can't clench your jaw, and it kind of automatically relaxes some of those facial and neck muscles which we want to stay out of the picture. Now, with the towel underneath our neck, it's resting in a position of slight extension. And what we're going to try and do by flattening down into the towel is simultaneously lengthening the crown of the head away from our body, stretching and lengthening the neck. And this will take our upper spine, our upper cervical spine, into that position of flexion. Now you may also feel the chin slightly rolling down towards your chest, but that doesn't want to be the dominant feature here. We don't want to simply just round the chin down, because you'll end up lifting the weight of the head up, and you can't do that without using the very muscles we're trying to keep relaxed. So it's much more of a combination movement where you're trying to sink your head down towards the floor, lengthening the crown towards the wall behind you, and bringing the chin slightly in. So this movement would be known as translation of the head. We don't want to change the angle where we're looking. We're staying looking up, our face almost remains parallel with the ceiling, and the whole head becomes heavy as we press down into the towel. Now what you want to try and do is to do that movement and hold it for anywhere between 5 and 10 seconds if you're new to this, while keeping these relaxed, while keeping the tongue on the roof of your mouth, and while the rest of the body is completely out of the picture. Some of you may really struggle to do that. So the final technique you can do is to initiate the deep neck flexion as you breathe out. So from the start, tongue on the roof of the mouth, neutral spinal position, body relaxed, inhale to prepare, exhale, sinking down into your cushion. Now, the cushion towel underneath, you'll be able to feel as you exert pressure into it, and you want to try and keep that sustained pressure into the towel for 5 to 10 seconds initially, and then you simply release out. When you're performing exercise like this with hard to reach muscles, muscles which become very deconditioned, deep core neck muscles, I tend to suggest people think of this analogy of tiptoeing past the sleeping giant. These are the sleeping giants, the big neck muscles, which have such a quick tendency to jump in and contract, and they want to steal the show. Put those to sleep, relax, and very gently just sink down into your towel. That weight of the head just increases, and it's about a 2 or 3 out of 10 effort. So you're just holding that tension in the back of the towel, the superficial neck muscles stay relaxed all the time, and then you gradually just release the weight out. If you try and do this quickly and suddenly, bang, these superficial power muscles come in, and you've completely missed the whole purpose of this exercise. So there's the basic technique. I'm going to discuss other points involved in this in just a second, as well as showing you how to use the pressure biofeedback unit. Okay, well, it's nice to be sitting up again. It's quite odd trying to demonstrate a technique like that. lying down and turning to the side, but hopefully you got all the particulars involved in that exercise. Now, the advantage of doing it lying down is that you can get these muscles to relax. When you're sitting or standing, these muscles are doing a very valuable job, which is keeping your head on top of your body. And if you were to try and do that same movement, the translation of the head backwards, the chin tuck, the lengthening of the back of the neck, you're not really going to have a great deal of objectivity whether the target muscles deep in and around the cervical spine are doing what you want them to do. So by taking the weight of the head out of the equation in this supine technique, it's much more advantageous and you can really get some greater objectivity. Now that said, we're dealing with something very simplistic in a towel for the main part, and it's just your feedback as to how much pressure you're exerting in that towel, which is what you're going on. You want to make sure that there's no undulations happening, no fasciculations, no twitching, no spasming, and it's only ever going to have kind of limited ability, limited accuracy, but it still serves as a really valuable tool. The pressure biofeedback cuff, on the other hand, is much more helpful in this regard because it has a dial on there, and on this dial it has varying degrees of pressure readings, and you pump up the cuff, and when you then apply pressure onto this cushion, which takes the place of the rolled towel underneath your neck, you will see the pressure changing as you perform this movement. You can look at the dial as you're holding it, and then you can look at the colour scheme involved on here and get very accurate amounts of pressure being deployed onto the cushion, which you can see is much more accurate than simply adjudging the pressure into a towel. So the pressure biofeedback unit is a good thing to do if you need to commit to long-term retraining of these muscles. Now, whether you end up doing it with that unit or with a towel, it's important to remember those fundamental aspects, because the kind of patterns which someone like me will see very typically in clients is excessive tightness in superficial power muscles and deconditioning and poverty of control in deeper core muscles. Now, the way these muscles are activated differs. They will have varying levels of excitability thresholds, which means these powerful muscles on the outside of the body are very quick to jump in. They don't need much input in order to get going, and they can become very mischievous in how they operate. Those deeper core neck muscles often need a much higher excitability threshold. They need far more persuasion to come in, and trying to get the balance between those two sorts of muscles can be very challenging. So whenever you're performing a movement like this, do it slowly, intentionally. Don't suddenly go up to your 30% effort. You just have a gentle crescendo. So in the sake of this exercise, you're gradually sinking that head down into the towel, as I suggested during the tutorial. What's really important here is, with any other exercise, but particularly where the neck's involved, is that you don't notice any adverse effects. There may be very rare occasions where you're trying this gentle exercise, and even that is aggravating. It's unlikely, but it can still happen. So if you are doing this exercise, you should find that the hands on the neck technique, where you're keeping everything relaxed, and just the relaxed nature of the starting position really reduce the possibility of anything happening. But if you notice that there's any aggravating effects, then of course stop doing this and seek advice from a medical professional or trusted exercise practitioner instead. Final point would be in terms of frequency of doing this. Well, if you've ended up needing to do retraining of the deep neck flexor muscles, you're going to need some pretty persistent effort. And you would start off by trying to keep that pressure into the towel for 5 to 10 seconds and do that 3 or 4 times in a row with a little bit of a break in between. But you want to get up to a point where you can keep a sustained pressure into that towel, in that position of deep neck flexion, with the gentle engagement, with the relaxation of the neck muscles, for 30 to 60 seconds, while breathing normally, without any funny business going on anywhere else. And that's a tough ask. You know, lots of people really struggle to get to that level of control, but if you can get there, you're not only going to be retraining the deep neck flexors, but the beauty of it is you are simultaneously lengthening and stretching out the back of the neck. So you are simultaneously getting a stretch effect and a strengthening effect, and it comes back to this kind of time-honoured refrain in this sort of world, which is you lengthen and strengthen. By strengthening deep neck flexors, you're lengthening the antagonistic muscle groups, and you can begin to work towards redressing the balance with time and practice. I'm not going to lie, it's going to take a long time for that to come to fruition, and this is just the first step in retraining these muscles before you move on to greater elements of strengthening and more functional movements. But for those of you who have had long-term neck problems, this should serve as an invaluable tool for you, and just keep up the effort. Make sure you do this exercise regularly, and it works really well with clients of mine over the years.